In December of 1811, as the world lay silent in anticipation of a bitter winter, a storm of violence stirred on a Kentucky plantation. A simple accident. An innocent young boy, enslaved and trapped under the rule of two brutal brothers, became a victim of their wrath. Struggling with fear, George holds a water pitcher's broken fragments. Lilburn and Isham glower, their expressions dark.
You've shattered what little honor you had here, boy. This boy thought he could break what wasn't his, thought he could disrespect our family.
This is a story hidden in shadow, buried in the soil of a young America, steeped in the brutal reality of slavery. It is the story of George, a young boy enslaved and sacrificed to the cruelty of Thomas Jefferson's own blood, Lilburn and Isham Lewis. In a single night, they stole his life in a violent act meant to show power, yet it unleashed a fury that no man could contain. History has hidden George's fate, a tale of horror left untold even by Hollywood. But the earth remembers. And on that December night, when the ground heaved and the Mississippi River itself reversed, those who witnessed the terror would wonder if the quake was not just nature, but retribution. A force rising from deep below, to remind humanity that every life has weight, and every injustice a cost. The night is still, with only a faint breeze stirring the trees. There is a small group of enslaved people gathered outside, trembling and casting fearful glances at one another. Lilburn and Isham Lewis drag George, barely 17 years old, into the center of the yard. His face twisted in fear as he realizes what is about to happen. It began as an act of punishment, a lesson, the Lewis brothers claimed, to teach obedience and fear. But the night would reveal a depth of cruelty beyond what any could have imagined. Lilburn stares at George, a look of cold fury on his face. In one hand, he holds the broken fragments of a ceramic water pitcher. He points a finger at the enslaved men and women huddled in terror.
Let this be a lesson to all of you. Watch and remember.
Isham grabs George by the arms and forces him to his knees, while Lilburn retrieves an axe, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. The gathered enslaved people look on in horror, some closing their eyes, others unable to look away. Under the cold gaze of the Lewis brothers, George's life was stolen with a single merciless blow. His cries were silenced, but the horror had only just begun for those forced to watch. After the murder, Lilburn stands over George's body, his breathing heavy, a look of satisfaction on his face. Isham, not looking at the others, turns to his brother with a sneer.
What should we do with him?
Make them clean up the mess. Let them see what happens to those who defy us.
He gestures to two men among the enslaved, forcing them forward. With cold efficiency, Lilburn and Isham ordered George's body to be dismembered and disposed of, stripping away his humanity and making those under their power accessories to the crime. The enslaved men, hands shaking and voices choked with silent grief, were forced to break and burn his remains, an act meant to erase not just George's life, but his very memory. The enslaved people work in silence, some stifling tears, others glancing nervously at the house. George's remains are cast into a fire inside the chimney, flames licking hungrily as the brothers look on with satisfaction. But the earth did not remain silent. In the very heart of the night, just as they thought the evidence would turn to ash, a tremor rippled through the ground, a warning of the terror yet to come. In the dead of night, the ground begins to tremble. Houses shake, fields crack, and trees are torn asunder. The entire Mississippi Valley shudders violently, as if the land itself is crying out. Townspeople are waking up in terror, screaming, clutching each other in fear as the world they know is ripped apart. But the earth itself had heard George's final cries. In the dark stillness of the early hours, a supernatural force was unleashed, a quake so fierce that it split the ground, altering rivers, creating lakes, and shattering the silence across 1,000 miles. The Mississippi River reverses in flow as the shaking intensifies. Towns are left in ruin, homes turn to rubble. In New Madrid, Missouri, people scream and scramble for cover. A townsperson yells, "It's a curse. The earth itself is rebelling." At the ruins of the Lewis property, Lilburn and Isham watch in horror as their home begins to collapse around them. The chimney, where they had attempted to hide George's remains, crumbles, exposing fragments of what they tried to bury. The quake had found them, just as their own sins had rooted deep into the soil. Lilburn and Isham, faces twisted in fear, knew in that moment this was no natural disaster. And so it was that they thought George's spirit would be erased forever, lost to ash and smoke, consumed by the flames. The brothers stood there, watching with satisfaction, as if the fire could burn away their sins, as if his screams could be silenced forever. But the earth is a keeper of secrets, a witness to every unspoken sorrow. And that night, it began to stir, slow at first, then with a tremor that crept through the ground beneath them, a warning. The very soil beneath their feet shuddered, and a low rumble rolled across the plantation, a sound that was more than just the shifting of earth. It was a cry, a promise that the cruelty inflicted would not go unanswered. The ground shook harder, and the Lewis brothers faltered, faces twisting in fear as the walls they thought unbreakable began to crack. They had buried George's remains, thinking his memory gone, but the earth would remember. It would not forget the injustice, the life taken too soon, nor the darkness that festered beneath the guise of power. As the Mississippi River turned back on itself and the land split open, the Lewis brothers would come to realize no fire could cleanse the evil of what they had done. The quake would be the answer to George's final cries, a retribution sent not by men, but by a force far greater, an earth that would carry the memory of his life forever. This was the new Madrid earthquake, the greatest earthquake in United States history, shaking the land at the height of slavery's grip on the South. As the ground tore itself apart, it carried the weight of untold stories, of forgotten lives like George's. What happened to the boy remains buried in the dark corners of history, hidden from textbooks, glossed over by time. This is a true story, one Hollywood has overlooked, a story begging to be told for the terror it holds and the history it bears. For beneath the earth's surface lie voices, waiting to rise, demanding that we remember the sins buried and the lives lost.